It's time for Cookies and Crime. This is the story of the Weepy-voiced killer. On December 31st, 1980, in St. Paul, Minnesota, Karen Pollock was beaten close to death. She had sustained severe wounds and brain injury. Hours later, police received a call from a man asking to send a squad to Pierce Butler Road because there was a, quote, girl hurt there, unquote. When officers arrived, they found her naked body in a snowbank near the railroad tracks. Despite her severe injuries, she survived. Then, on June 3, 1981, Minneapolis police received a spine-chilling phone call. On the other end was a man crying and pleading, "God damn, will you find me? I just stabbed somebody with an ice pick. I can't stop myself. I keep killing somebody." The body of Kimberly Compton, an 18-year-old student from Wisconsin, was found near an unfinished freeway, stabbed to death by an ice pick. 2 days later, police received another phone call from the same man apologizing for stabbing Compton and said he would turn himself in, but he didn't. This man made several more calls to the police, one stating that newspaper accounts of some of his murders were inaccurate. And then another, in a whimpering voice, he cried, "I'm sorry for what I did to Compton." That's when police dubbed Paul Stefani the Weepy-voiced killer. His next victim would be Kathleen Greening, who was found dead at her home, drowned in her bathtub. Surprisingly, Paul Stefani never made a phone call to the police after this murder. His next victim was Barbara Simmons, a 40-year-old nurse on the Minneapolis side of the Mississippi River. The two met at a bar after Simmons gave Stefani an extra cigarette. After spending time together at the bar, Simmons told a waitress, "He's cute. I hope he's nice since he's giving me a ride home." But she was found stabbed to death the next day. And that's when Stefani made a long-winded phone call to the police, saying, "Don't talk, just listen. I'm sorry I killed that girl. I stabbed her 40 times. Kimberly Compton was the first one over in St. Paul. I don't know what's the matter with me. I'm sick. I'm going to kill myself. I think I'm just going to. If somebody dies with a red shirt on, it's me. I've killed more people. I'll never make it to heaven," unquote. His last victim, who survived, thankfully, would be Denise Williams, a 19-year-old prostitute he solicited in the red light district of the city. After doing the deed in his apartment, Stefani offered Williams a ride back to the district, and she accepted. But instead of driving her back to the city, he took her down a dark and secluded road, claiming it was a shortcut. He then started stabbing her with a screwdriver, and during the attack, Williams was able to hit Stefani on the head with a glass bottle, causing deep cuts to his head and face. A man living nearby heard her screams, and when he came to the scene, wrestled Stefani, causing him to flee. When he got home, he noticed that he was bleeding badly and called 911 for medical help. His familiar voice and call, along with his recent attack, made police realize that they had their weepy-voiced killer. It's time for Cookies and Crime. This isn't a true crime, but a story of reincarnation. I love reincarnation stories because who doesn't like the mystery of what happens after we die? Maybe some people, but not me. Anyway, this is the story of the Pollock twins, who may have been siblings in another life. In May 1957, in the small town of Hexham, England, 11-year-old Joanna Pollock and her sister, 6-year-old Jacqueline, were on their way to church when they were suddenly struck by an erratic driver. The two sisters were killed almost instantly. They later found out that the woman who was driving was under the influence of a number of drugs and had intentionally hit the children after being forcibly separated from her own kids. The parents of the young girls, John and Florence Pollock, were obviously devastated. The following year, Florence gave birth to twin girls on October 4th, 1958, which is my birthday. The twins were named Jillian and Jennifer. The miracle of this was that there was no history of twins in either parent's family, and so Florence's doctor predicted that it would be a single birth, and the likelihood of twins was very low. Jillian and Jennifer were identical twins, but they had different birthmarks, which is very unusual. Jennifer had a small birthmark on her left hip, which was very similar to a birthmark that Jacqueline, the previous daughter, had. She also had a birthmark on her forehead, which was similar to a small scar that Jacqueline had in the same spot. When the twins were 3 months old, the family moved to Whitley Bay. But as they got older, Jillian and Jennifer were able to remember details of Hexham, which they didn't grow up in. The family returned to Hexham when the girls were 4, and the twins were able to point out and name landmarks that they had never seen before. They were also able to identify their late sister's toys by name. Even though Florence put her previous daughter's toys out of sight, the twins started asking for certain toys back. It was almost as if the twins were asking for their own toys back. Many of the things that they did left their parents without any other explanation other than that they were reincarnated. The deceased sister Joanna was very protective of her younger sister Jacqueline. Now Jillian, who was born 10 minutes before Jennifer, seems more mature than her twin sister. They liked the same games and ate the same foods and even played a game where they recreated the sister's accident. While they were playing, Jillian would cradle Jennifer's head, telling her, "The blood's coming out of your eyes, that's where the car hit you." The twin girls also had an irrational fear of cars, and when they were younger, had reoccurring nightmares about being hit by a car. By the time they turned 5, the memories of their past lives slowly started to disappear. 5 to 8 is a time frame of when allegedly reincarnated children forget their past lives. The case of the Pollock twins has been long cited as proof of reincarnation. The major argument of this case is that the twins' memories may have been influenced by their 4 older brothers. What do you think? It's time for Cookies and Crime. This is the story of Ronald DeFeo Jr., an American mass murderer you all know. DeFeo, also known as Butch, was born September 26, 1951, and was the oldest of 5 children. Around 6:30 p.m. on November 13, 1974, 23-year-old DeFeo went to a local bar and cried for help because he believed that his mother and father had been shot. DeFeo and a small group of people from the bar made their way to 112 Ocean Avenue in Amityville, Long Island, New York, to check on the DeFeo home. DeFeo's friend, who was a part of the group, made an emergency call to the police department, who searched the house and found 6 members of the family dead in their beds. His parents and 4 siblings, 18, 13, 12, and 9 respectively, were all dead face down in their beds. All the victims had been shot with a rifle around 3 o'clock in the morning of that day. Physical evidence shows that his mother and one of his sisters were both awake at the time of their deaths. Ronald DeFeo Jr., now the lone surviving member of his family, was taken to the local police station for his own protection after suggesting to police that a mob hitman by the name of Luis Fellini may have carried out the crime. But his interview had a lot of serious inconsistencies, and the following day he confessed to carrying out the killings himself, and Fellini, the alleged hitman, had an alibi proving he was out of state at the time of the killings. DeFeo told detectives, "Once I started, I just couldn't stop. It went so fast." He said that after murdering his family, he took a bath, put on new clothes, and told them how he discarded crucial evidence such as blood-stained clothes and the rifle he used to murder his family with before going to work as usual. The really strange thing is that no one heard the gunshots and there were no signs of struggle from any of the victims. Out of all the 6 victims, you would think at least the last person would think something's up after hearing 5 loud gunshots. DeFeo's rifle didn't have a fitted sound suppressor on it, but they did find evidence of sedatives having been administered to the victims. DeFeo admitted to drugging his family, but the autopsy report indicated otherwise because they couldn't find any trace of drugs in their bodies. Even the neighbors didn't hear any gunshots fired, they only heard their family's sheepdog barking. DeFeo claimed that he killed his family in self-defense because he heard their voices plotting against him. Another possible motive was that he wanted to collect his father's life insurance. It was also known that DeFeo had a horrible relationship with his father. In 1975, during his trial, DeFeo attempted to plead insanity, but was found guilty on 6 counts of second-degree murder. He was sentenced to 6 sentences of 25 years to life. DeFeo only recently passed away on March 12, 2021. Some of these stories seem so long ago, but some of these people are still around. And that's the story of the Amityville Murders. It's time for Cookies and Crime. This story isn't just about one serial killer, but 4, known as the Ripper Crew. The Ripper Crew consisted of 4 men and were a satanic cult and organized crime group composed of serial killers, cannibals, rapists, and necrophiles. They stalked the streets of Chicago, Illinois from 1981 and 1982 and were suspected in the disappearances of 18 women. The Ripper Crew's first victim would be 28-year-old Linda Sutton, who was abducted May 23, 1981. 10 days later, her body was found in a field in Villa Park, Illinois. Her body had been mutilated and her left breast was amputated. The gang laid low for almost a year until their second attack on May 15, 1982. Lorraine Borowski was just about to open the realtor's office where she worked before she was abducted. Her body was discovered 5 months later in a cemetery. The Ripper crew attempted to abduct another woman, Angel York. They threw her in their van, handcuffed her, and slashed her breast before throwing her out of the van, still alive. Unfortunately, her description to the police of her attackers failed to produce any leads. The men were also suspects in the disappearance of Carol Pappas, wife of Chicago Cubs pitcher Milt Pappas. She disappeared on September 11, 1982, and her body was recovered 5 years later, but the death was ruled an accident. Most of the Ripper crew's victims would have their breasts either slashed or amputated. Their last victim would be Beverly Washington, who was found by a railroad track on December 6, 1982. She also had a part of her chest amputated and severely slashed. But she survived the attack and was able to give descriptions of her attackers to the police. Robin Gecht of the Ripper crew was the first to be arrested, but was released because police had little evidence connecting him to the crimes. During their investigation, police discovered that Gecht had rented a room in a motel along with his 3 friends. The hotel manager said that they held loud parties and appeared to be involved in some kind of cult. That's when they were able to track down the other 3 men. Edward Spreitzer and the Cocorellis brothers. I'm probably saying their names wrong, but they kind of deserve it. When they were interrogated, one of the men confessed that he and the others had taken women back to Gecht's place, and they called it the Satanic Chapel. This is where they tortured women and amputated their chests. No, this is all disgusting, but I have to warn you about the next part because it's even worse. The Ripper crew would eat the severed body parts as some type of sacrament, and Gecht would do disgusting, violating things to the parts. 3 of those men would confess to their crimes, but Gecht claimed that he was innocent. Gecht would be the only one sentenced to death and was executed on March 17, 1999. Thomas Cocorellis only served half of his 70-year sentence, and as of 2019 lives in Aurora, Illinois. It's time for Cookies and Crime. This is the story of Jack Kevorkian, or Dr. Death, who helped people basically unalive themselves. Jack Kevorkian was born in Pontiac, Michigan on May 26, 1928. Do you know what other famous characters from Pontiac, Michigan? If you know who I'm thinking of, put it in the comments. Kevorkian was born to Armenian immigrants from present-day Turkey. As a child, his parents took him to church weekly, but he started questioning the existence of a God, as he believed an all-knowing God would have never let his extended family die in the Armenian genocide. So when he was 12, he stopped attending church. Kevorkian was a very smart child. He had skipped a few grades and taught himself multiple languages. In 1952, he graduated from the University of Michigan Medical School and completed his residency training in anatomical and clinical pathology. Pathology is the study of the causes and effects of disease or injury. During his career, Kevorkian had very controversial ideas related to death. One of the ideas he proposed was that prisoners on death row should be given the choice to be used as medical experimentation under complete anesthesia. He also experimented with transfusing blood from a recently deceased person into a live patient. He did this with the hopes that the US military might be interested in using this technique to help wounded soldiers during battle, but the Pentagon wasn't interested. Then, in the 1980s, Kevorkian really got into the ethics of euthanasia, which, as a refresher, is the practice of intentionally ending life to relieve pain and suffering. In 1987, Kevorkian started advertising his death counseling services in the Detroit newspaper as a physician. His first public-assisted suicide was of Janet Adkins, a 54-year-old woman diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. He was initially charged for murder, but they were dropped in 1990 because there were no laws in Michigan regarding assisted suicide at the time. But in 1991, the state of Michigan revoked Kevorkian's medical license. But still, between 1990 and 1998, Kevorkian assisted 130 terminally ill people to their deaths in his infamous van. He was able to skirt the law for the most part because the final action that resulted in the actual death was done by the patient themselves. Kevorkian was the one to attach the patient to the euthanasia device, but it was the patient that pushed the button to release the drug or chemical that would end their life. Kevorkian obviously received a lot of criticism, one being that allegedly 60% of his patients were not actually terminally ill, like they weren't actually sick. In a 2010 interview, Kevorkian stated, "What difference does it make if someone is terminal? We are all terminal." His view was that a patient had to be suffering but did not have to be terminally ill to be helped. At one point, he did serve 8 years in prison for second-degree murder of one of his patients. Kevorkian passed away in 2011. He paved the path for physician-assisted suicide, which is now legal in 11 states.